So I have a few words before I actually start on this, and it's some etymology words, what the meaning of words are. So parliament, to speak with the enemy. It's a trespass. You enter unlawfully to grow less and to diminish in power. So that tells me that when we vote, we're saying we can't do it for ourselves, we can't think for ourselves, so instead of being a group talking and making a decision, we're going to let one person talk for us. So that's a diminishment. Government, the act of ruling. Well, man and woman must have created government, right? So if we created a government, then they shouldn't be ruling over us. They should be doing what we tell them to do. So it's about control, command, and administration. And that's all they were really meant for, was administration. We wanted them to handle our affairs and stuff. But you can't do that with a pirate, I'm here to tell you. So I grew up in the village. It's an inhabited place where there's farmsteads and country houses. That's what I grew up with here in Williams Lake. Became a town, which was originally a group of buildings, gardens, fields, farms, manor houses, right? There's always a big house somewhere, dwellings and enclosures, and that would have made a town, and that's what we have, and I think that's what's going to save us. A city is a community of citizens. Citizenship. Citizen is a word the pirates use. The only word that represents us collectively is man or woman. That's it, boy or girl. You get into child, parent, you, even the word you gets you back into their jurisdiction. It's frightening, really. The legalese is there to deceive. So a community is a citizens, it's large and it's important and it's capital. Well, when you have something that's more important than someone else or something else, everybody's home's their castle. I don't want a great big house, but I'm not Greek. I think if I was a Greek person or Italian and had big families, I'd need a big house because they do that. They're big families. So then we come from village, town, city to municipality. And that's a town or a city having corporate privileges. That's why when the COVID thing happened, my neighbor said to me, well, I didn't have the privilege to go have my hair cut. Thank goodness it's not long and really gray, or I'd be looking for a broom to ride here. But it's a local government, but it is there as a corporation, and it's a privilege to be, you get privileges, not like if you were in your original town. So the mayor is the chief magistrate, he's superior, he's powerful, and he's the important one. So that mayor has a really important role. So what's a corporation? A corp. Dead corpse. So it's a dead entity. And that's what they created when they incorporated our names. We became dead entities. So if we found ourselves in the court, in the pirates' court, they had to summon us. We had to be summoned. That's why the judge says everybody stand, right? Because you're dead, so you got to be summoned to stand up. And then you have to be represented from the living to the dead entity so that they can discuss how they're going to deal with you. So it's a dead body, it's a body in form, appearance, and it's an assumption of a body. And that's why you can't talk to anyone that's in a corporation, like your mayor, your school district person, your prime minister, any of these people. If they're involved in a corporation, it'd be like going into Subway and saying, well, I don't like how you're making your sandwiches, and they go, okay, and then as soon as you go, they continue the way they are. They don't hear you because they don't see you as the living man or woman. So legalese is the language that they're talking about. It's not lawful, it's not the language of the people. And it means to gather, pick out words, to contract or contrivance. And a contrivance is a plan or a scheme. It's invented for attaining an end. And that is to deceive. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that. So piracy in general is a willful depredation and hostility to the law, because the pirates had no law on the sea, none, and they've come onto the land. Treason is a betrayal of trust, treachery, and a breach of faith. Now, if you go into the government, you might see signs, Trudeau for treason and all that kind of stuff. Well, he works for the corporation. He's the CEO. And the Crown Corporation is the City of London, of which there's shareholders, and the Queen is one of them, and he's related to the Queen. So treason, if anyone that goes into a position into the federal or provincial government, including our MPs, they swear their oath to the Crown. So they can't represent us. They can't speak for us. There's nothing, it's just wah, wah, wah when you go talk to them, literally. They cannot hear you, they cannot do anything, and I'm going to prove that to you as well. But their treason, everything that these are from our mayors, our councillors, I mean, they are our friends and neighbors, but they are committing treason against the people. When they are knowingly, we're not, but when they are taxing and bylawing and all these other things, I'm going to show you how that fits in. That's treason against the people because it's a betrayal of trust, it is treachery, and it's a breach of faith. So extortion is the act of taking away from a person with force, duress, authority, right? Like when our children were born, undue exercise of power, right? Illegal exaction to obtain by force. So there's a lot of extortion going on right now. And I don't think, because I know a few accountants, and I don't think they realize that they're the extortionists for the government of British Columbia and the government of Canada corporations. They have to collect money illegally somehow, right? They don't look like pirates, but they're pirates. It's all piracy. A person is a part of a drama. It's an assumed character, a mask, faults, and a corporation. And that all those words are in here other than man or woman. And that's why I'm still learning, and I say person and people and children and all that, because they stole that too, you know, and that really chokes me up. So a man, the definition of a man is to think. We're mankind, and we were meant to think. And the beekeeper doesn't want the bee thinking, because then he can't steal. So the beekeeper puts a bit of smoke around so he can go and steal. He doesn't take the brood, but he just dumbs down the man enough to steal and to keep creating and then stealing and creating and stealing. So one who has intelligence. So we are mankind and we have intelligence, and I think it's time we used it for our children's sake. So that's what that means. So when I talk about do the presentations, I want to expose the fraud that we're in. And the packages that we have made are part of that. We made a lot of them. They're expensive because paper's expensive and ink's expensive. So I wanted to first just let you know that was that initial fraud, and that's where it all started. So the maxim in law says, ignorance of the law is no excuse, and he who creates owns. And I've been doing a lot of thinking of how we're going to get our community back. And I think, well, I've been here since, like I was born on 4th Avenue. And that little house is still there. The Fawcett's house is still sort of tucked in there. And I was thinking, I have a lot of visions and dreams. And I find myself in the mayor's, in that council room quite often going, no, you're going to listen to us because we created this town. Everyone that's standing here created this town. From the small business to the truck driver to the machine operator, the librarian, whoever it is, we created this town. You're not here to tell us, well, you only got 10 minutes. Oh, well then you're telling me you don't work for me. You just confirmed then that you don't work for us, that you work for someone else. So we're going to discover who our mayors work for, and it isn't for us. So we've got ourselves in the crib and out of the crib. We know we're men and women. We know we have sons and daughters, boys and girls. We know that there's harm coming upon them, upon the land that we built. And it's caused by pirates and people that don't deserve it. They're just parasites. They don't do anything for themselves. The king doesn't even put the pen in front of himself. Somebody has to do that for him. So I see through their costumes all now, and it doesn't matter. You're just in a costume. So in these packages, there's a really, really good 2-page document. It's called Where to Now, Canada. And when I started with my grandson, homeschooling when they closed the schools down, he was in grade 1. So when I actually started to get things going in September, because the schools weren't going back, I was doing grade 1 and grade 2. And it was a really hard role. And then in end of grade 2, starting into grade 3, I was supposed to teach them about Canada. So that was 2022, beginning of 2022. So I phoned the school. I didn't have any resources or anything. And I phoned the school and I said, I need to find out about the Constitution of Canada. And they said, well, go to the British North America Act of 1867. I said, okay. So I Googled it and I went there and I thought, this doesn't seem like a we the people to me. This seems kind of like the old feudal system back in England in the day. It was the Queen and the Crown, and they're going to put a Governor General there, and then the Parliament's under her and or him. And I'm thinking, well, that's like a dictatorship. Right? Someone at the top that everybody answers to. I thought, well, that doesn't seem right to me either. So I got the documents and I started reading it because I didn't want to tell my grandson something that wasn't true. And something just wasn't sitting right with me. So this Where To Now Canada is the story of Canada. And in 1893, the good Queen Victoria took out of the Corporation of Canada. She took out, because it was a corporation at that time, it was the British North American Act doing business as Canada. And it was all set up like a corporation. So the good Queen Victoria took out heirs and successors in about 1893. So when she died in 1901, the document was dead. It didn't exist anymore. Kind of like a power of attorney. You know, it's an agreement, and then when it's gone, it's gone. So we became sovereign, men and women of the land, in 1901. But we had already our prime ministers and the people that were representing us were already feeling pretty privileged. And we read a little bit about the definitions of all that. And they were feeling really privileged. And so they lied. They deceived. And they let status quo happen, and they just kept on taking the resources and everything else. And at that time, when the good Queen, so-called good Queen, did this, they didn't really know a lot about us in the West, because the Hudson's Bay Company was still moving from Upper and Lower Canada and coming across the West. So that was the resources of the West, and it really used to choke my dad up, and all the boys that used to come and visit my dad, that they'd get talking about this, you know. As soon as they finished voting in Ontario and Quebec, then the vote was all over. Why were we even voting? And I didn't understand what they were talking about, but they were upset, I knew that much. And that was why, because we had no voice, but it was all fraud all the way along. And fraud vitiates everything, fraud voids everything. So this birth thing that happened for us, that when we were born and they made this birth certificate, that's a void contract. That doesn't exist because it was done in fraud. But the only way you can deal with fraud is to have a contract, and the contract's broken. Well, we never made the contract, and hopefully I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about that. So it tells all the lies, tells us what we really have and all the lies from that point on. So that's what that part is in there. And then because I don't want you to think I'm giving you just a whole bunch of talk for nothing, I went to the Canadian Parliamentary website. And again, I was researching for my grandson, you know, what's Canada? So I went to the Canadian parliamentary system, and it says Canada is a constitutional monarchy. Well, I already found out that the monarch in 1901, we were already sovereign. So I thought, well, something's a little tricky on there. Plus, constitution is one thing and a monarchy is something else. So I thought, yeah, that's a little more trickery going on. So it says it's a parliamentary democracy founded on the rule of law, land, air, water, and respect for rights and freedoms. The government acts, that's a key word, right, pretends, in the name of the Crown. Well, we know who they are. They're the big main corporation of the pirates. But derives its authority from the Canadian people. Well, we know people are fiction, according to their law book. Doesn't say men or women. So A little more trickery going on in there. The Constitution involves more than a single document. Well, that's more trickery too, because the more documents you get, the more convoluted it gets, right? The Constitution Act of 1867 brought Canada into being. That's the corporation. With a constitution similar in principle to that of the United Kingdom. Yeah, feudal system, just like I thought. The Constitution Act of 1982 contains the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So that's for those in the corporation. That's why when any of the law cases went, they couldn't do anything. And that was a game to make us feel small and hopeless. And it's a procedure for amending the Constitution. Some of Canada's most important rules are not matters of law, but are conventions or practices. So this is all just corporate stuff. That's all it is. And the Constitution Act of 1982, I researched that too, because I thought, oh, okay, there it is. And I was reading that, and then I was looking over all the documents. And anyone that wants to know, I can send you the documents. And I was reading through them, and there was the BNA Act of this year, and the BNA Act of that year, and I could get the thing and show you. But anyway, all these BNA Acts, well, then it's not a constitution, it's all these different acts. But when Trudeau Sr. tried to put in the Constitution Act of 1982, Quebec never signed it, it was never ratified. That's why they did the Meech Lake Accord and the Charlottetown Accord, and they were trying to get Quebec to sign. And I asked myself, well, because I looked to see why it wasn't done and all that. Quebec never signed because Quebec already knew they were sovereign from 1901. They knew that. And so, and if they'd have signed, they'd have lost their French language. Well, that French and English thing's been going on for a long time between those royal families, the French side and the English side, and because they're all related through marriages and all this stuff. So that's just another big lie too. It's never been ratified. We are a sovereign land. We are a sovereign land, and I want to show you that with their own document. So then you might say, well, how am I so certain that they're pirates? Why do I call them pirates? Well, part of it is because of Black's Law. It's the law of commerce. Commerce is the law of the sea. Sea is vessels. Vessels were pirates. But Parliament says so. In Parliament, when you go to the House of Commons procedural information, I think it's like page 16 or something in the definitions, it'll have 35(1). And then it'll list A all the way down, so that in every enactment, these definitions apply. Canada, for greater certainty, includes the internal waters of Canada and the territorial sea of Canada, the corporation. So it doesn't say anything about land. Canadian waters includes the territorial sea of Canada and the international waters of Canada. Again, no land. It does not talk about land. We are already sovereign on the land. We just have to know how to get ourselves back where we belong. And again, with the Oceans Act, they just talk about water, the continental shelf, because the pirates only have jurisdiction so far out, right, from the landmass, and then the rest is open waters, and it's fair game kind of deal. I watched a few pirate movies when I was a kid. In relation to Canada, it means the continental shelf of Canada in the Oceans Act. So it's the continental shelf and the international law and the domestic laws. It's the laws of the pirates, okay? So I didn't want to tell you anything that wasn't true. So then, how do I know it's a corporation? Well, I started looking into that too. So I went and I was looking, and then, like, how do I know it's a corporation? And I heard somebody in England say, well, they were looking for something, and they said, oh, you can go on Dun & Bradstreet. So I Googled Dun & Bradstreet, and I put in Government of British Columbia, because that's where we live, and I do maps of British Columbia. I'm trying to teach my grandson about that. Now this is pretty woebegone because I've photocopied it a lot of times, but this came up, Government of Canada. The overview, it's an executive, it's an industry, executive, legislature, and other general government support, public administration, general government, and its address is room 901, 91F, Harcourt House, 10 Harcourt Road, Wan Chai, Hong Kong. So British Columbia is registered in Hong Kong. And that will come into play a little bit different. Government of Canada, same thing, key principal, Justin P.J. Trudeau. And don't think he just is a daft fool, because he's as sly and slick as they come. He acts like a fool, and in some things he is a fool. He can't count probably to save his soul. But he is not a dummy. And then I also went to the United States Security and Stock Exchange Commission, and I found British Columbia. And there is lots of us are traded back and forth on the stock exchange. And it shows where we're registered. British Columbia is registered in, we're a United States company. And United States Securities has Canada, and I've got most of the provinces and all that too. They have a number there. They took it down last week on the 14th or 15th. They took it down. I can't get to it. So I was talking to my other grandma, my daughter's, my grandson's other grandma, and I really wanted someone to talk to, so know that I'm really grateful to have you all here and I can talk to you about it. I really, really appreciate it, because I've been going kind of nutty in by myself. And I said, did you realize that British Columbia is registered in Hong Kong? And I was like really freaking out. Well, how did you hear that? She said. And I said, it was on Dun and Bradstreet, I'll show you. And she happened to be there, and we went on Dun and Bradstreet. She says, well, I don't like this. It says you use cookies. And it doesn't say who the principals are and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, she got a point there. I really don't know a lot about computers, so maybe it is just a bunch of, who knows. So after she left, I had a bit of time, I got some thinking about it, and so I just put, who is Dun and Bradstreet? And lo and behold, they came up on Wikipedia. They really exist, and they've been around since 1841. And they were the ones that registered all the pirate ships, and all the merchants, and all that kind of stuff. So that just confirms something else. And their operating income in 2021 was $71.7 million. So I thought, well, pirates are doing pretty good off of all of us. So that shows you that it's true, that we are corporations. So then that brings me to, well, how are we going to deal with these corporations? Because they are so big. You said that they're pirates from the 1700s, and it goes back to Egypt, and oh my. And I felt like that too. So I went to bed and I thought on it, because I don't sleep very good, and I thought on it. How does something like this have so much power when it's, it's big, no doubt, and they have all our money, but how would the masses ever have a hope of taking down something that's that big and that powerful and all that? And again, I'm teaching my grandson, so I'm thinking, well, how would you tell him that? And I thought, well, if an animal finds itself in an anthill, sometimes the ants can take it down just one bite at a time. And then if you have a lion, and there's a bunch of hyenas, and the lion finds itself by itself, sometimes the hyenas can get the lion down a bite at a time. So I think we need to take these down a bite at a time.
I've got a different approach.
Well, when I'm finished, we'll have questions. So the Clearfield Doctrine then is a court case, a Supreme Court case in the United States in 1943. And the Clearfield Doctrine was the Supreme Court case between the corporation of the Clearfield Trust Company versus the United States Corporation. And it began through fiat money, because the Americans, the Corporation of the United States sold its bank in, I think it was 1918, and they brought in the Federal Reserve. So they were using the Bank of London's money instead of their own currency. And that happened to Canada too in 1974, when Trudeau Sr. sold our bank, the Bank of Canada, to the same pirates in Bank of London. And then our money became fake money as well. So the Clearfield Doctrine court case from 1943 between the Clearfield Trust Company and the United States Corporation, the Supreme Court told the United States Corporation that they lost their sovereignty, because a corporation by any name cannot claim sovereignty. Because a corporation, the pirates don't care what you are. If you're Tim Hortons, you'll go get donuts. If you're calling yourself the government of British Columbia or whatever, then you're selling your product, right? But you do not have the legal right to be a government. You lose your sovereignty to be a government. Now, they didn't say you can't say the word government in your corporation. You can't, you can say that, but there's another fraud and deceit that goes along with that too. So the Clearfield Doctrine made it very clear that when a government reduces itself to the level of a corporation, it does not have the right to taxation. It does not have the right to enforce any laws upon you. It cannot tell you whether you can have chickens or no chickens or whatever it is. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the CRD or the Williams Lake mayor or whoever it is. When you are a farmer and you want to make an agreement with the guy you buy hay from, you want to buy some round bales from hay, you have an agreement between yourself and the one you're going to get the hay from. And so if there's a problem with that hay, you have a recourse usually, right? So you tend to deal with people you know, and you have relationships with people you know for that reason, because you're contracting, okay? So our governments, no matter what they call themselves, City of Williams Lake, Caribou Regional District, Province of British Columbia, Quesnel, it doesn't matter. We're living in a corporate pirate realm, and they have to have a contract with us. And because we don't know, like Grandpa said, we're not awake, then they have what's called a tacit agreement. And they have that same thing with the voting. When we register to vote, and then we decide, well, I don't know, it's the lesser of two evils, I don't know who to vote for, so I'm just not going to vote. Because we're registered in the corporation as the dead entity, and we don't vote, then it's still considered a tacit agreement for the governance. So it's lies upon lies upon lies upon lies. But truth, you don't have that with truth. Truth is just what it is. And the Clearfield Doctrine can be used worldwide because it's a corporate commerce case. So it can help the farmers in the UK or Germany or the Netherlands or down in Westwold. It doesn't matter, and it helps you and me. Because there are court cases that are a little bit more complicated, but the Clearfield Doctrine is very clear. A corporation by any other name is still a corporation, and you have to have a contract. And if they have one that's in a tacit, and we know then that we haven't, that's how we get our property and stuff back. That's how we can put a stay in there at this point, because they can't tax us. And our regional districts know this. I've served them with this notice, and I didn't want to lie and tell you something that wasn't true. So I've sent documents in, freedom of request. I want you to show me where I agreed, or my family agreed to all these covenants, and the Queen was on there in the Province of British Columbia corporations. And so I had to give them 30 working days. So they came back to me and they said, well, we can't find a contract or a consent to contract for any of these things, the bylaws or anything else. And I said, well, thank you very much. And they also gave me their oaths. And their oaths are to the corporation, not to us. But they are our neighbors. They are our neighbors and our friends, because we voted for them, because we didn't know. And we want to believe in our hearts that they didn't know. But some of them do know what's going on. And some of them are going to pay a price for it, because we have within our own rights to say, okay, you caused trespass against me. I'm going to claim a trespass against you because you're aware now and you're continuing to do this, right? So you're consenting to the fraud, and there's no statute limitation on fraud. So I did that, and then I put documents together now that with my Land Title Act, that I'm not going to pay taxes, because I went through the federal, provincial government as well. And I said, I wrote 3 letters, and I said, hey, I've discovered that we're a corporation. I didn't know that. So can I see the contract that I made to pay property tax? Because Clearfield Doctrine, taxation is one of those things. So they never got back to me. Well, when you don't get back to someone, that's called a tacit consent. They're agreeing because they're not saying anything, just like we were. We were agreeing because we didn't say anything. Same thing for them. So then I sent the second letter. I had more information, and then a third letter. And I've since discovered through the oracle that told me to watch my language, Edward, hi Ed, he told me about another case, and that's where in 2011 in England, when they had the tube bombings, you know, after the 9/11 thing, and then there was these bombings everywhere, and there was these suicide bombers over there in England. Well, a guy from Canada went over there. I don't know the case off the top of my head, so I can't give you all that, but I have it. And he went over investigating, and he was in Ireland, and they went and they got him because he made a small video about it, that it was just a big fraud. Because if they were suicide bombers, well, they'd have been in bits and pieces. They wouldn't have been able to be found a couple days later and shot and killed. So he exposed it, and they said, well, no, you can't do that. So we're going to take you and we're going to put you in the pirates court, and we're going to really wring you through the coals. But he won because he had all the evidence. So they thought that they had him, and he did, and he stood his ground. He said, I'm a man, and here's my evidence. And he won the case, and it was in 2011. And that court case said that the Queen was lawfully not a valid monarch. They hadn't been, like I've told you, since 1901. But that court case proved it, and that court case will be going in with my land title stuff and anybody else's, because we have the proof that they don't have any jurisdiction on the land, and that they're just a bunch of big fraudsters wearing costumes, and they're parasites because they're living off of all of us. So I thought, well, geez, it can't get any worse than that. It just can't. I mean, really, can it get worse than that? So I noticed that our CRD said that their budget process is revised based on public input. Well, I got my public input thing, and I had 1 week. So these documents, they're like piles. They're like this thick. It takes lawyers who knows how long to make all that gibberish. And then they want us to spend a week to decide what we think of it. Well, it's fraud. I'll tell you what I think of it. I think you can all go to jail. And tomorrow's too soon, kind of a thing. So I'm putting my thing in there. I'm not paying you any tax because you're fraud, you're illegal, you're illegitimate, you're unlawful, you're all sorts of things. And I have all my documents ready for that. They also had in their own documents that they set the property tax revenue. Well, we know that that's not right. They don't have the jurisdiction for that. Were they in a public position, where we hired them into a public office and not a corporate office, they would have that jurisdiction. But they don't, because they're in a corporate office. In fact, they're in a public-private partnership, which is United Nations. We've been usurped by an outside entity, an outside corporation that's gone worldwide. And that's just these criminals with all the money. They all sit around together and decide what we're going to eat and what we're going to do and all that other kind of stuff. Well, I think they could, sorry Ed, but I got a few choice words I'd like to say on that. So on January 12th, they had another meeting on the development procedures and fees that they were updating to reflect new laws. Well, what new laws? Well, that'd be the Corporation of British Columbia's new laws, and that's the emergency laws and another way they want to get us off our land. So the main change was removing public hearing requirements where they are prohibited under the new law, because a corporation doesn't work for us. If you work for the corporation, then these laws would apply to you and your franchisees and that kind of thing. But we don't work for them, so they don't apply to us unless we contract and we say yes, we'll only have 4 chickens. Now, no normal average neighbor is going to have 100 chickens in their backyard and half of them roosters and stuff. We're not going to do that to our neighbor. But if something does go amiss, generally neighbors talk to each other. And when there's a problem, back in the day, then the men got together and the men talked it out. And if the one didn't want to cooperate, well, he might wake up in the morning and he just got no more roosters. That's the way it was done. And if you goes back another couple of 100 years and you lived on a big estate and there was a laird, well, you'd go to the laird and you'd bring the cow in question, and the laird would say, "What's your issue?" "Well, you took my cow." I never took your cow. So he'd ask the guy that took the cow, he'd say, because the other guy's complaining, right? He's the claim, he's making the claim that somebody's done something. And he'll say, well, I know it's my cow because it's been in my field all the time. And the other farmer says, yeah, but that cow has a little wound on the back there where a dog bit it. And so the laird would say, okay, he goes out and has a look. He says, that's not your cow, because there's that wound there. And it was dealt with. We didn't have to go through all this stuff because we're sensible men. We have intelligence, right? So I thought, how bad could it possibly get? Well, in 1974, when Trudeau Sr. sold our bank to the international bankers, the Corporation of British Columbia, and others as well, they created the BC Assessment Authority. And lo and behold, this year was their 50th anniversary. And I thought, well, that was 50 years ago. Well, it's 1974. And I was thinking, it's 1974, there's something about that year. Well, that was the year our banks were gone, and we went in, little by little, they took our coins, or our bills, I think it was $1 bills, and then $2 bills, and they took our money away, right? So I thought, well, so who are they? Well, they're a corporation, right? BC Assessment Authority Corporation that was created for the Corporation of British Columbia to collect money from you and me. That's their sole purpose. So from 1974 till 2010, they collected $1.04 trillion. And that isn't, we don't even have 6 million people according to Statistics Canada in British Columbia right now. But when I did the math on that, because my grandson has trouble with math, when I did the math on that, that would be 173,333, I don't know why it all comes out at threes, but 173,000 for every man, woman, and child in British Columbia back in 2010. It was 14 years ago. So they were a corporation, created for a corporation to extort money from us because we didn't know we didn't know. When I found that out, I was seriously unimpressed. And that's when I sat down and wrote the letter to the finance minister. And I said, you show me where I agreed to this. Because my mom said she's still alive, she's 84. She never agreed to that either. So what is it, a crown corporation? It's a state-owned enterprise. It's a government entity. Well, we know governments are corporations. In order to earn a profit for the government, for the corporation. The national government or provincial government, right, because the province of British Columbia is a sub-corporation of the government of Canada, and Williams Lake is a sub-corporation of British Columbia, so it just keeps going up. And same with our regional districts, been amalgamated into Williams Lake. So it's the national government or provincial government has majority ownership over these state-owned enterprises, and they're established to pursue financial objectives. Well, I just think that's a bunch more piracy, and I'm looking for some trees, nice sturdy ones, and some rope, and it'll be Old West style for me. So if that's not still enough, we're still going down, we think, well, let's go to our MP. We voted for him, we're gonna go to him, and by God, he's gonna fix it up for us. Well, he can't do anything either, because he belongs to the corporation. When he goes in there, he swears his oath to the corporation, just like the CRD swore those to the corporation, the mayor swore his to the corporation. They don't represent us. We need to get that back, because we built this town, we live in this town, and we want our town to do what our town wants and not what some United Nations corporation thinks they should do. And that is having no farms, no food, living in 15-minute cities, which is good if you're old, you want to get around, you maybe don't want to do 5 cords of firewood. I figure when I'm 80, I'll decide. But I don't want someone telling me that I can't go visit my friend in Kelowna, or my old lady friend can't go see her great-great-granddaughter in Quesnel, because she's gone her limit of getting out of town or whatever. So there's pros and cons to that too. So if you're a pirate, and we know they are, and they want to extort, lie, steal, and every other nasty thing they can possibly do to us, they got to sell it to us. They got to make it sound really good. So we'll go to our MPs, and we're going to ask them, You better fix that up. We voted for you. Well, that's what happened to the people in Alberta in 1990. They hired, or what they thought was hiring, to represent them. They didn't know that. An MP, J. Wilton Littlechild. Now, Littlechild was voted overwhelmingly in I think it was Wetaskiwin, Alberta. And he was voted to go into the corporation and go against the GST. But when he got in there, he had to swear his oath to the Crown. So he has to do what the Crown says. And the people were not happy. So when they found this out, they took him to court. And in 1990, the court case came about. It was the Wilton Littlechild MP versus Citizens of Canada. And now we know Citizens is the dead entity. And it was at the Queen's Bench. Well, we know she's illegitimate too. And the judge, it was in 1990, and this is what the judge said. He said, however, I am satisfied that the plaintiffs have no cause of action against the defendant. I know of no legal duty for an elected official to represent the people. He came right out and he said that. He said, well, it would be a good thing though. You know, it'd be nice if he could do that, but there's no legal means for him to have to do that. He has to be able to, or she has to be able to go into their government position and have the freedom to do what they're expected to do. And it's just theater. It's just acting. It's just masks. And if you ever watch the House of Commons and you know that you know, it is just, I mean, it is just the biggest bunch. Oh, it's the biggest bunch of theater. So he said, at the end, he said, well, it appears to me that the only remedy existing for the plaintiffs, that's the men and women in the country, because this is law, right? It isn't just in Alberta, is to vote in a future election. So that's why we can't go to anybody. We have to bring ourselves together and en masse say we're not having it. So that's why that didn't work. But that still isn't enough of a crime for these guys. So now our CEO, Edie, who has got himself in a lot of other hot water over the years when he was in, I'm learning all this stuff from, because I'm meeting people around Canada on Zoom calls and in international calls. And he has gotten himself into some pretty shady stuff with the RCMP, who are a corporation as well. They don't represent us either. So they have this new thing, and this is why it's really important that the farmers, the ranchers, and you and me, especially if you're rural and you're out of the city district at all, because they want us into this 15-minute city. And Williams Lake is very important strategically. I think they tried to burn us out in 2017 because any of the men that said we're not leaving, we're fighting, we'll help fight the fires and all that, they were getting a lot of resistance from the provincial government. Well, why would you do that? You know, I remember traveling in the probably 1966 or something, because I was just maybe in school, and we were going to see the relatives that lived in Vancouver, and we got stopped at Hell's Gate, and the forestry guys were coming along looking for men to fight a fire. And my dad was a fireman, and we all ended up falling asleep in there, and you know, he came in there all black, and we were there late, and all that kind of stuff. And now they don't want anybody helping anybody. And they have made this new emergency act. So, and it's very scary, but remember, we don't have to be scared. We're the elephants here. We have all the power, and we are not going to let a bully scare us into doing things that they can then, you know, pick us off. And it's a corporation. It's their rule. We don't have to rule. We don't have to live by it unless we consent. But we have to let them know we don't consent. Right? That's important, because otherwise it's a tacit consent. We're going along with it. And I got lots of documents to help you with that. So the main thing, and it was really upsetting the Thompson-Nicola Regional District. The members there were very, very worried about it. And they sent Evie a letter on December 6th, and again on the 29th of December. And they were saying to him, look, we are really worried about this new disaster management thing. The wording of it, who's going to pay for it, because it comes back to the communities. How's it going to be enforced? Because they want to enforce you to get you off your property if they have a potential that something might happen. And they're using this a chicken flu, you know, if your neighbor's got chickens or there's a chicken farmer or a ranch or something, oh, now there's some kind of mad cow or something, so everybody has to go because, right? And all this kind of bollocks. So we have to know what they're trying to do. So there has to be a potential cause and a threshold for action, those two things together. And what was really upsetting the Thompson-Nicola Regional District is because we're spread out. Canada's a big country. I've been all the way over to the tip of Newfoundland. I went to Lanceau Meadows where the Vikings were. And it's a big place. There's room for everybody. And there's enough for everybody too, by the way. So if it's a potential cause, even if it appears imminent, like fire, I put fire there because I've seen what's going on in the forest. They don't smell the same. Seen what's going on in the skies. Rioting is new. Security threat is new. Terrorist activity is new, and a prescribed incident is new. Now, prescribed incident could be where they lit those fires in the wind, right? So that covers then they could say, oh, well, now I got to get you off your land. A presence or suspected presence of an imminent spread of a transmissible disease or environment toxin. Well, the only ones that's environment toxing us is the military and stuff. You know, it's, you know, I could tell you a whole story on that where I got involved with that educated environment person. I feel sorry for them. Prescribed type of event or a presence of a suspected presence of a prescribed circumstance. And they even say in their big, huge book that these things aren't quite defined. But they need to move ahead really fast because the smoke is clearing and the people are wising up and the people are not having it. So when they talk about rioting, and this was super funny for me, it was one of the few laughs I've had, because when they put down this, I'll read it properly here to you, this number 1, which is security threat. And if you watched any of the stuff that happened in Kootenay, not the Kootenays, the Shuswap last year with fires, you'll know how the people were treated there. So under this new one, under the Emergency and Disaster Management Act, security threat means actions that severely impair the functioning of a government or society, including actions relating to overthrowing a government. And when I read that, I just laughed. I was laughing so hard, I went, you have really, man, oh man, you're not even a government. I could see it if you were a government, but you're just a corporation that says you're a government. And I put that in some of my documents that exposes the fraud. It's listed right in there that you cannot call yourself a government. It's just a word on a page, and that's in Black's Law. It's fraud, right? So that had really gotten them upset about that. So that was pretty funny. I got a good laugh out of that. So how do we know how to defend ourselves? Well, it's really simple, actually. We have 10 points of contract law, and I made this really simple. It comes in a little book. It's for lawyers, but I just made it simple. And you have to have the power of a choice, right? You want to buy that hay or not buy that hay. You want someone to cut your hair or fluff it up for you, or you don't. You make an agreement. So there has to be free will to do it. There has to be one or more party needed to contract. Well, that's common sense. You're not going to contract with yourself. There has to be an agreement. So somebody makes you an offer and you accept it or you don't. And you can do a conditional acceptance, because you can say, well, yeah, I bought that hay, but if I get it home and it's rotten in the inside or it doesn't weigh what it's supposed to be and all that, well, we're going to have to figure that out, aren't we? And you make those arrangements, so there's a conditional acceptance that goes on there. And a tacit one, I told you that before, that's if you don't say anything. You can't decide, you don't say yes or you don't say no, and you don't say anything, well, that puts you into their jurisdiction. So you best make a decision when something's put before you. And there has to be an intention to create the relationship. You can't say, well, I'm going to get your hay. I need to know I'm going to do your hay. Or I'm going to come, will you hold that dress for me? You know, I'll be in on Friday. And then you don't show up for like 2 months. You know, so there has to be, you know, you have to have that relationship built in the first place, because otherwise it's fraud and you can be in trouble. If I asked Jennifer to hold a dress for me and I didn't come back for 2 months, and then she seen me and she said, you know what, I could have sold that dress twice over, now it's on sale, I have the right to charge you the difference on that, you know. And she would. She would be in her rights to do that, because I would have to prove differently. The proof is on the claimant. So the government is the claimant. They're saying you have to pay tax, or you can't have chickens, or you can't park your logging truck in your yard, or whatever you're doing. Now, you're not going to do something that's going to harm your neighbor, obviously, but that's how this works. The person that says you got to do something has to show you. Prove it then, right? So there has to be lawful consideration too. I'll pay you for the hay, or I'll pay you for that dress. I'll pay you for the whole thing. You know, something happened and I know we got everything on sale now, but I'll pay it the full price. And so there has to be a lawful consideration. There has to be win-win on both sides. You can't make an agreement and then it's all a big lie, which is where mortgages fall in. Mortgages are already paid for. They're paid for out of your birth certificate, but you didn't know when you put your signature there that you turned the trustee beneficiary thing upside down. And that's just another big fraud. It's all fraud, and there's ways of dealing with it. So capacity is also really important too, because, you know, who would have known that to say a person or an individual or citizen or something like that didn't mean a living like a living man or woman, right? Who would have known that? So all these documents that we have, this language on them, this all uppercase, upper and lowercase, and just lowercase, that's called glossa in law. And glossa, you know, you've heard the term, I'm just going to gloss it over. You know, let's just gloss it over. Well, that's a legal term, glossa, and it means deceit in language. And so all these documents that we have, if you look at them and they have upper and lower case and all uppercase and all that, that's all fraud. That's a voided document, but if you don't know, you don't know, you can't deal with it. So you have to have the capacity to understand what you're reading. You can't have a brain injury, you can't be a drunkard when you're signing it or anything else like that. And there has to be free consent to the what you're gonna do. And anything that's illegal or harmful to either party that's made in a contract voids a contract. So if you find out something wasn't right, and you know that for a fact and you can prove that, then you have jurisdiction to say that that contract is void for that reason. You have to have a certainty of meaning, and there's a difference between a signature and an autograph. An autograph is the living, the man or woman, and a signature is the fiction that they create that we have to put on documents is under signature. And there's ways to sign that as well. So if you see something that says autograph, and I'm just learning about this, different people have different ways of doing it, but Edward, the Oracle, he told me just keep it simple, Darcy. Just keep it simple. Don't get into the muddied waters. He said just make sure that however you sign, and that there's a colon in the middle, and then you put the other name on there. You never put surname or anything and then man or woman. And if it's your children that we're talking about, your son or daughter, and it's a school issue, then you put boy or girl. You don't go into any of their language, and we're going to have to deal with that too. So you have to have certainty in your contract. So how do you know then? So that's really easy to understand in making a contract. And the 12 presumptions of court, I mentioned this in some of the documents because we don't need to be represented. If we want to have a claim against someone for wrong or harm, then we can just go in and we can represent ourselves as living. We don't need to do that. How can we do that? It's by this. This is the 12 presumptions of court. It's a Roman court, so I told you I wasn't lying. It does not operate according to any rule of law, land, air, water. It's pirates' rules. But by presumptions of law. Therefore, presumptions presented by the Private Bar Guild, that's the British Accreditation Society. So if you ever see the Australian bar or whatever it is, they're worldwide because the pirates are worldwide. It's their rules, it's their courts. So if presumptions presented by the Private Bar Guild are not rebutted, they become fact and are therefore said to stand true or as truth in commerce. Pirates' truth. There are 12 key presumptions asserted by the Private Bar Guild, which, if left unchallenged, stand true, and that's public record, public service, public oath, immunity, summons, custody, or children, court of guardians, court of trustees, government as executor and beneficiary, right, corporation, executor de son tort, incompetence, and guilt. So this is a really good paper to have because it explains how they use their trickery. So that's what the package involves. It tells us who we are, who they are, and how we got into the mess. But then there's just a little bit more now, and that's the New World Order. How did the United Nations and all that get involved? Now, did you want to take a break, or do you want me to just finish? I'll just ask you.
Keep going.
Go ahead? Okay, so I'll just finish it
If
up.
anybody doesn't know, the washroom door is unlocked at this end.
Thank you all. Bless your hearts. Okay, so now we've got that first part of the fraud. Now, how did we get into the United Nations? Well, we got into the United Nations through public-private partnerships. And Brian Mulrooney did that to the Corporation of Canada and all the men and women therein in 1992. And he did that at the Rio Summit. And he went there with over 170 other CEOs from other corporations around the world. And he signed us on to the Agenda 21, which we're in now, and the United Nations, what are they called here? The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that's what they are, the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030. So Agenda 2030 wants 30% of the land without people on it, amongst other things, and humans living in human settlements. Well, that just sounds like feedlots to me because we're mankind. We're not human settlements or anything else like that. So we know it began 150 years ago with the Queen. We know we've been sovereign since 1901. We know we've been lied to ever since and to this day. So he went and did that. He signed us on to that whole agenda. And so when he did that, then all these documents went worldwide. So the Agenda 21 planning guide went to every local area. The UN Sustainable Development Goals went worldwide, and that's that rainbow circle we see everywhere. So if you see a rainbow circle on a government office, that tells you they're a United Nations field office. And Williams Lake's a 15-minute city, so don't let anybody sell you on that fact that, oh, that's just a name, or it's trying to sell you on that, because the CAOs and the CEOs have more power than the mayor because we've been usurped by the United Nations. So we know too that in 1994, 2 years later, the municipal primer on the United Nations Conference on Environmental and Development was being implemented in every municipality. We know what a municipality is now, it's a corporation. So it went and it was implemented worldwide. And then the International Council for Environmental Initiatives is ICLEI, and ICLEI's involved big time in this, getting us off our land. They want us off of there. And when you have an agreement or a mortgage or something like that, and that whole agreement is over the land, it's actually a land agreement, not your home. So when you can't pay your mortgage, it's all a lie anyway, but if you leave your home and it's unattended, they've said you gotta, vacate your home, I forget, not bankrupt, there's another word for it. Foreclose and stuff like that. If you leave your home, and this happened to a young guy in Alberta, they did that. He was a logging type guy, and they foreclosed. He kept all his machines and stuff, and so they put him in the clink. And he knew enough to say, I'm a man, and he didn't sign anything, and 5 days later they let him out. And so then they came back, and he was in his home, and they took him again this time for 10 days, but he had a buddy stay at his home, because when he went back to his home, he found somebody in his home, a realtor in his home, and they didn't think he was ever going to come back there. So then they took him in the clink for 10 days. I'm a man, and he didn't sign anything, and then he went back and they grabbed him a third time, and I don't know what it is, about 3 times and you're out, but on the third time he hadn't abandoned his home and they couldn't take it. Because the banks know that you already own what you have, because they know all this trickery, right? And so because he left the home, it was considered abandoned, and that's how one of the other ways they're going to take our homes is because we've abandoned them. The mortgages and all that are already paid. And that's another whole subject, and I'm just trying to get everybody into knowing how to stand their ground, because that's a big enough job in itself. And then also these globalists found the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and that's when our municipalities were changed from in 2004 to the community charter, right? Another shipping term in 2004. So that's how they implemented the municipalities, and trickle by trickle, just like in the old times, the Vikings or the Saxons, they went and they took village by village, and then they came to the main cities and they either sacked it or they starved them out. Well, they're trying to starve us out. And I'm not eating bugs, by the way. Men can kill the bugs. Bugs belong in the garden, but I'm not eating them. Even my wolf wouldn't eat a cricket. So with all this happening, where does our mayor sit? Well, we need to find out. We need to find out. And so the Agenda 2030 is going to enforce on the populations of the world that we're in these human settlements. They're already, BC is way moving really fast. So if we want to go to some of our national parks like we used to, we have to apply to go. Only so many humans are allowed to go, and all this kind of crap. Which is, again, like I say, they do not have the jurisdiction over us unless we let them. They want to say you will own nothing and be happy. Well, we don't own anything right now because we don't know we don't know. But we know we don't know, and so we're learning about this. They want the central bank digital currency. That's where everything is on a card. And it is convenient, don't get me wrong. Those cards are convenient, you know. But I've been to the grocery store before when my card never worked. And I had to go home. I only grocery shop every 2 months, and I had to come home with nothing. Because the computer was down, and I just abandoned my buggy and everything. I abandoned ship, and I left it there, and I headed home. So it is great. I mean, it has its moments, but then we should decide that, not what somebody else tells us we can or can't buy. And we've all had exposure to this, so we know what happens when we don't have control over our purse. Even man purses, by the way. They don't want us to have any wood-burning stoves, gas, or propane, any of that kind of stuff. Well, propane doesn't work too good after, I think, from what the men tell me, when it hits minus 40 and stuff, propane doesn't work so good. So here in the north, if we had to have just electric, well, how's that going to work, right? So again, I say, well, you quit flying and you quit eating meat and all that, and you sell some of your mansions on the coast, and then you can tell me what I can do. So they don't want meat or dairy. That would be very limited, and that's why they pushed so hard with the Westwold farmers this year. I did reach out to the Westwold farmers, and the fellow said, yeah, but we're working with our area and all that, but I just couldn't explain to him. He knew his municipality was a corporation, but he didn't know the province was. And I was trying to explain to him that I understood what they were trying to do, but it was wah, 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 right? They don't hear you because you don't belong in there. But they're abusing someone's son and daughter or husband and wife to be these enforcers. And those enforcers that go out there and threaten and coerce and all that, that's a crime. And even the pirates' crime, that's a crime. Because it's coercion, it's threatening, it's extortion. And they don't realize when that farmer and rancher finally have their documents together and someone comes and tries to tell them to get off their land, they can say, no, here's my documents, nobody has any jurisdiction over me. But do you realize that by doing this enforcement, because the Clearfield Doctrine makes that clear, they cannot do any law enforcement on anybody without a contract. Because that's not a public jurisdiction. A public mayor has all those jurisdictions, but not a corporation without your consent. And so then those sons and daughters or husbands and wives would be responsible for any harm they cause on you, and you would be fully within your jurisdiction. That's the way criminals work. They get someone else to do it for them, right? So we're all victims. And then if they didn't have enough with our kids at birth, they want the sexual orientation and gender identity program in the schools. And I'm helping local people with that too. And that goes back to jurisdiction, same thing. But we need to empower our parents to stand up and be parents, or you don't deserve your kids. I told that to my daughter. She, because I was learning all this stuff, and then other grandma said, well, you can't believe everything on the internet, and you know, all this kind of stuff, and I was kind of worried about it, and I said to her, well, you need to get your live birth record because I would like that for the family history, because I go back to 1700s. And she didn't do it, she didn't do it, she didn't do it, and I was trying to make things simple, and then I said to her, did you do that? And she said, well, I haven't really had time. I said, you don't deserve your children. Mom, how can you say that to me? I said, because I gave you the documents, I was willing to pay for it, $25 or something, local hospital, and you can't be bothered? Then you don't deserve them children, because right now they are not your property, and you cannot fight for them if you don't know, you know? And I love my grandsons. I spent 5 years teaching my grandson. He's not at Grandma's residential school anymore, by the way, because I'm all here with you guys and I have all this stuff to do. So I said, you need to big boy up and go to homeschool. I know you can do it. So that's why I'm able to do some of this stuff. So put simply, if we want to maintain our freedom, our lifestyle, and any kind of resemblance of a future for our children, because a lot of them are walking around like this, and they think having chips and being part of a machine and all that's probably really good because they've been sold on it. And we've been too busy to be the families that we used to be growing up. And that's not our fault, because it was just this slow trickle, drip of abuse. And I remember Williams Lake when I was young, and it did have a dirt street. My grandma called it a dirty one-horse town. And then the Ball family paved the roads, and we went from there, you know, and everybody did what they had to do to build the town. So I've seen it when the Panama wasn't there, and Delaney's Hardware's always been there, which is kind of disappointing. I hope Angie steps up to the plate, because these community members that are voted into these offices are going to have to step up into a lawful jurisdiction for the people, or they're going to have to step down and step aside so somebody lawful can be put in there. As long as I got wind in my lungs, because I got more wind in my lungs than money in the bank. And for those that are afraid of the money in the bank thing, they're going to take it anyway. It's just paper anyhow. So I can't be bought, because I know that, and I've had dreams about that, where these criminals have said to me, well, Darcy, you sure talk a lot. I kind of would like you to maybe not talk so much. So what would it take? And I said to that individual in my dream, I said, well, what would it take for you to sell out your grandchildren and their children and their children? What would your price be? You know, and that's how I feel about it. And if they give you a bunch of money, what are you going to do with it? You can only buy so much food and stuff. You already own your property. And when they decide to pull the pin on all that stuff anyways, it's not going to be worth anything anyhow, like they did in India. So we can't be afraid of all that. But the men that, I was talking to Ernie and Lou about this earlier, the men that know about the forests, because right now we got a corporation, I'll just take Tolko, I think that's a forest thing. Okay, Tolko Corporation. And then you got the Corporation of British Columbia. Well, they don't have any jurisdiction on the land, but they're acting like they do. So then this corporation, they're all related as you go up to BlackRock and the Crown and all the pirates. So you got Tolko making a deal with the Corporation of British Columbia to have the resources, and it doesn't go to the people. Well, that's just not right. So we don't have to have this thinking that how are we going to survive? What are we going to do? Now, I'm not saying that when they pull the pin, it isn't going to be hard. That's why those of us that know what's going on are going to have to be ready, so that if there's a crisis, I hope there isn't, but if there's a crisis, we have men that know what to do, and we have people that know what to do for this, and we can keep the calm and keep the peace and protect our neighbors as best we can. And that is a job we can do. There are those that know about medical stuff. There are those that know how to control things and do things and fight fires and all this kind of stuff. But we don't have to collapse everything we built, because we do have farmers and ranchers that know what to do. They feed us. And we have enough resources that it would be the men that get together, the logging men and women, that they would decide how this should work, because they do it, that's their job. They would know how to do this. I couldn't decide how to do this. But if a car's all smashed up and comes into my bay, well, I spent 30 years fixing cars, so I could fix that. And I'm a person that looks at situations. How did it get in? It has to come back out. Same way, village by village, man by man, woman by woman. And we need to clear the smoke, and we need to do that for each other. And we need to stand around each other and our children and our grandchildren, because we did have a good life. So, and I have all documents, and we're gonna have other meetings. That's why those papers are there. So if you want more information or you wanna talk to me one-on-one, I'm more than happy to do that. But we can get small groups together and talk about these things in a little more depth. You can see the documents, because I would